Welcome to this episode of the Bear Ventures podcast, where we open the book on venture capital and give you a seat at the table. My name is Samir Vig, and I'll be your host today. And I'm excited to announce that I have with me Nasir Qadree, founder and managing partner of Zeal Capital, based in none other than Washington, D.C., the home state of Bear Ventures. Actually, the first time we've got another investor from Washington, D.C. on the line. We're a small but close community. So, Nasir, I'm excited to have you on today.
Samir, it's so great to be with you. Happy New Year to you, and congratulations to you launching this podcast, launching your fund, Bear Ventures. It's been great to spend time together and get to know each other over the past few years.
No, I appreciate that, Nasir. And actually, before I forget, I owe you a congrats. As a few hours ago, I had read one of your first checks where you were one of the first investments in, just became a unicorn. So congrats on Isusu and to the team and all you guys have helped build.
We cannot be more excited. I mean, when you think about the type of founders, the type of team that we're seeking to back and partner with early on, but long-term investors, it's Samir and Abby. I mean, they are the epitome of our inclusive investing strategy that we can get to shortly, but just could not be more excited, especially given that this is our first fund, right? Our first fund has happened in less than 2 years.
That's incredible. It came up. The name came up in one of our first conversations together, and I've been tracking it through you since. And so I was very, very, very excited to see how that played out. And so what would be helpful, actually, and without further ado, I'd love for everyone to learn more about you and the fund in itself. You've got an exciting background. You've built something incredible here in DC. And so I'd love for everybody to hear it directly from you.
Of course. Yeah, I, like a lot of people who fall and find their way into venture, was not a straight and silver bullet. I'm from Atlanta, Georgia, born and raised, and I say that proudly as a Southern boy. And I found myself graduating from a historically Black college university. And I also say this because it absolutely does not fit your traditional investor across the private markets. I found my post-graduation at Hampton University. I worked at Goldman Sachs and State Street Bank in the public markets. And then fast forward, I actually got my start into venture by opening up a coffee shop with a couple of friends in New York City. And it was a fairly unique coffee shop. It was a coffee shop at the intersection also of an incubator where we housed a number of entrepreneurs. We were a wine bar after 6 o'clock. And so as an owner, you tend to lean into a lot of your customers, a lot of the conversations, the community that you were building. And lo and behold, we were attracting a great deal of investors at the coffee shop. And I, at that time, was not the happiest during my time in traditional financial services across Goldman Sachs and State Street Bank, and knew that this mission alignment was missing in my day-to-day work. And one of my bosses at State Street Bank continued to encourage me to go out and explore your passions. At that point, I was also on several boards focused on education, first-generation college students, and underserved youth. And so, students that mirror similar upbringings to me, but also became more and more fascinated around technology and the role of technology was playing to level the playing field and being a force for good. So we befriended a number of investors who were frequents at the coffee shop, and they introduced me to the private markets, more specifically venture capital, even more specifically impact investing, and then more around categories like ed tech and employment technologies, whole future of work sector. And so to fast forward, I ended up getting introduced to a early stage Washington, D.C. based firm called Village Capital, where I became at about, I believe I was 28 or 29, global head of their education, practice and investments. And that was amazing exposure because I had a chance to source, invest, and help scale early stage entrepreneurs who were solving problems across education to K-12, post-secondary, and the workforce. And in the latter part of that time, led their U.S. economic opportunity portfolio. And then AT&T, to fast forward, was an early backer in Village Capital. In fact, they launched a new initiative that That's goal was to inject equity capital into early stage entrepreneurs, solving problems around narrowing the skills gap between education and employment. But also we were providing non-diluted capital across several ESOs around the country, entrepreneur support organizations like Grant Capital. And I thought that was interesting, and especially being a large tech or phone, however you want to classify a media giant today. And it also gave me this brand recognition where, entrepreneurs, would be excited to explore partnering with you because of the resources, not just capital, but because of the resources at AT&T. And they had an amazing team as well. And so between those two funds, coupled with some angel investing, I took a step back, had conversation with some mentors, and they encouraged me to explore my new fund, which is today's called Zeal. So spent all of 2019 ideating the concept of Zeal, really thinking thoughtfully about my track record, my reputation, and then missing opportunity that continue to exist across the venture capital ecosystem. And head down, build a strong advisory board, and just really took flight from there and went into market January 2020.
That's amazing. And I think that's around the time when we had met, and I've been fortunate to witness the journey from there on out. But no, I appreciate the background on that. And you mentioned the word team a few times, and I think that is a key differentiator of what you're looking to build. It's not just another fund, but you have a long-term vision of a firm with the right people around it, doing more than just provide capital. And one of the topics that we're generally going to discuss today is the idea of diversity across founders, diversity across investors, geographies, and ideas. And so maybe to kick things off, I'd love to hear your view on the team, how everyone came to be, and how you view or what your vision for the team is.
For sure. In my experience doing this work for the past 7 years, I recognize that the best and most investable entrepreneurs exist everywhere, not just coming from very few places, backing the same people, on average coming from the same universities. And I thought that was a huge missing opportunity when when you're not proactively leaning into ecosystems that were often left out, that we're seeking to support, in many cases, underrepresented entrepreneurs. And so recognizing that over the years and viewing it now as a missing opportunity, and now having this autonomy to build my own franchise, I said, if I'm going to do that, it's important that I build the right infrastructure, a diverse management team that has diversity of skill set, background, and even more importantly, diversity in ethnicity and gender. Because the truth is, and data says very clearly, when you are a diverse management team, you do outperform when you bring those diverse perspectives to the table. And so I thought long and hard and not pulling the trigger too quickly on anyone to build the right team, beginning with my advisory board, then my core team, my operating partners, even thinking thoughtfully about administrative work from my assistant to my legal team, to the tax and audit. And then of course, thinking about what does my LP base look like in that relationship, from the lens of diversity, from the lens of a mission alignment, and of course, strategic partnerships as well. So fast forward, the way we've thought about it has really been intentional. It's obviously everything we don't see enough of across the venture private equity markets, asset class, and quite frankly, even on the other side in terms of companies as well. And so, my North Star, when I think about the future of Zeal and how we think about success, is that we, based on the performance of our portfolio companies first, we are the blue chip gold standard example on how best to truly build a diverse management team at the fund manager level, that in turn organically will reflect a more diverse pipeline and portfolio of companies getting investment here in the US and globally. And then on top of that, you're investing in companies, not just that are tackling huge markets, but they're also solving painkiller problems. The world does not need another food delivery app or beauty brand. Nothing wrong with that, but I truly believe the future of disruptive companies, tech companies, is in categories like financial technology inclusion, in employment technology, workforce readiness, education technology, and even healthcare, which is a newer category we're becoming more and more excited about.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And I think it's diverse teams and ideas and backgrounds that help come up with those exact ideas that you would theoretically invest in. I'd love to hear more about how you actually source. You're not one to go sit in New York or Silicon Valley and just go after others in the cap table and co-invest alongside them. You truly are going after a different group. Geography doesn't kind of hold you back. How are you going about sourcing it from such a big, untapped in many ways market?
That's such a great question, Samir, and I'm glad you asked it. The truth is, I think I always, and us as a team, always give the nod to San Francisco and New York. In fact, we will still invest in companies that come from those regions. But as you know, we have this investment discipline, this market-backed strategy coin, inclusive investing, we actually trademarked, and essentially allowing us to expand our wings, our lens, and best position our companies to outperform. And so when we think about sourcing capabilities, we believe that, great entrepreneurs exist everywhere. But what we've done proactively is partner with a number of ESOs, all of which are outside of Silicon Valley, New York, and Boston, where we know 80% of capital has been allocated over the past decade plus. In fact, 62% of private market capital globally has actually been allocated in those same 3 states. And so in the States, you have the 47 other states, including DC, fighting over the remaining 20%. I think that's wrong. And I think, again, if entrepreneurs are truly going to be the change makers of our country, for the globe for that matter, then it has to include everyone, which means we have to find ways to democratize access to capital, entrepreneurship, and careers in the technology sector. And so what's worked for us so far in the early days is joining, when I think about false fintech, and I think about Capital Factory, Camelback Ventures, Village Capital, based here in our hometown in DC. I think about the TechStars program in Denver, Colorado, Ashoka here in DC, the Inclusive Incubator here in DC. These are ESOs that are housing and championing pre-seed to Series A early stage entrepreneurs that also, in many cases, houses a diverse pipeline of entrepreneurs, but they also house early stage future of work, companies selling into post-secondary in the workforce, including financial technology projects. And so it's important that we proactively build relationships with these incubators and accelerator programs. And then you build on top of that, just a lot of the number of pre-seed VCs that are out there who, what their bread and butter is pre-seed. And so it's important that they form relationships with us in efforts to underwrite in future financing rounds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the pre-seed early stage is where I think it's most critical to back a more diverse set of founders. And if anyone looks at your website, they'll see the word inclusiveness, I think, a few times. And the idea really isn't stemmed from just inclusiveness. There is a real financial metric behind backing diverse thought and getting the best companies out of there. How are you seeing the market generally when Zeal is one platform, but are you seeing more and more people go after similar types of companies and founders and markets?
Yeah. Well, in terms of the market trends today, Samir, you're seeing more new funds being developed and come into market, at the early stage. And I think that's great for entrepreneurs. It means there's more capital that's being deployed into entrepreneurs. And in some cases, given some of the similar strategies, there's overlap in cap tables, et cetera. And so, I think that we're definitely, I think while there's more funds being built out across the private markets, the good news is that there's a lot of these funds are not even headquartered in the traditional tech ecosystems, which means part of their strategy is actually, be a fund that's focusing on the Midwest region, right? I think about Lightship Capital with Brian and Candace, right? I think about Collab Capital with another Brian and Jewel Burke, for example, and down in Atlanta, Georgia, right? And of course, here in Washington, D.C., Zeal Capital Partners, we have a huge competitive advantage because we have we have Capitol Hill, we have think tanks, we have different federal agencies around like the Department of Labor and Treasurer and Commerce and SBA. No matter which side you sit on, I think it's a more welcoming White House. And so, and who has an interest around thematic themes like racial equity. And then you have blue chip universities, which I think a lot of these ecosystems do have. So you think about talent, the ability to thrive off the talent like Howard and Georgetown, for example. And so while there's strategies that strategies are focusing on backing more diverse entrepreneurs, I think that is very, very much important. I think there's also strategies that are also, really focusing on regions, injecting more capital and recognizing the amount of local assets and how their local assets being, again, school, which yields talent, corporations, factories. Midwest is about supply chain, for example, and brand CPG. So and that's the beauty, I think, and this is what I love. History buffs, the beauty of this country is that when you think about 250 years ago, this country was a startup. And you think about the most iconic businesses like Detroit, the car was the hot technology. And quite frankly, Detroit was what Silicon Valley. And Silicon Valley was a field of apple orchards back then. And then you think about Pittsburgh. Steel was the hot technology. And Silicon Valley was a field of apple orchards. And you fast forward today, Carnegie Mellon is probably the most innovative and most active university that's focusing on robotics and machine learning. So I think you're seeing this evenly distributed innovation happening locally. The challenge is, it has been for some time, is that you have local investors who genuinely want to back entrepreneurs and innovation in their own backyard, but it simply isn't enough. And so we just been having like this Silicon Valley arrogance, say, hey, if you want my capital, then you need to fly and spend 6 months or move your company to San Francisco. And I think what the upside, while obviously the pandemic has been terrible in terms of taking lives, it has pushed people to live anywhere they please. And we've seen Silicon Valley move to places like Miami and Austin. And so we're just seeing this evenly distributed workforce, which I think is going to be a great thing, continue to be a great thing as it relates to leveling the playing field in terms of how we think about access to capital.
Yeah, from more and more conversations with other funds or GPs, I am hearing that, processes have definitely changed from where they used to be, and it's started to get folks outside of the bubbles, if you will, right? So, the funds I work with, either on the West Coast or in New York or Boston, they're now seeing more deals outside the geography of just where they're headquartered and the value of doing that. And they've changed the process where, you're right, they don't need to have daily access for meetings back and forth all the time. And that's helped their overall move to a more diverse base of founders. You yourself started a fund in Washington, D.C. So I'm just curious, what was the thought process? It was probably much easier for you to raise money in New York or Silicon Valley. It's very important, it seems like, for you to have started in a completely separate market. I'd love to hear the thought process you went through to do that yourself.
For sure. Well, one of my biggest heroes and someone I've always looked up to is David Rubenstein, who
Mhm.
would, in her own backyard, build the Carlyle Group, one of the most prestige private equity firms in the world. He's from Baltimore, comes from a blue collar family, and I, when I think about that story and the rationale behind why he started it in Washington D.C., very similar to why I felt very confident with extreme conviction to start it here in DC. Especially being a Black investor, a Black fund manager. And to my point earlier, I truly believe in the number of competitive advantages that exist here locally that can that can allow companies to thrive. This can be a huge active ecosystem. On the one hand, we do have now over the past 5 years a number of new funds that are investing in early stage, growth stage. I think about Phil Bronner and Russell and Brian Goldsmith. I think about Motley Fool Ventures by Olin Douglas, who is proactively, investing in companies, but also in funds. There are LPs in Zeal. I think about angel investors locally as well. David and Captain Bradley have been huge champions of me. And I think what's exciting about the proactiveness and around the venture community, the growing venture community, as well as this community being such a diverse group of entrepreneurs and the ability to engage non-traditional stakeholders who can actually uplift and support and add strategic value to the ecosystem. So I think about the Brookings Institution. So we actually have a formal partnership with the Brookings Institution where we incorporate a lot of their R&D, their research from an impact lens as we think about the wealth gap and the skills gap across the country. It also gives us a sense of policy constraints and regulatory constraints, especially when we're operating in, some can call it, highly regulated sectors like fintech and edtech, for example. We think about, as I alluded to, the different federal agencies like Department of Education, Labor, Commerce, SBA, for example. And then there's Georgetown and Howard University, HBCU, and George Washington and George Mason. And so collectively, I really felt like, and then DC itself is like a very small. It's a powerful city, but very, very, very small. And it's easy, like you and I. It's really easy to connect with someone across the venture entrepreneurial ecosystem, and they be keen to meet with you and support you. It's a very collaborative ecosystem. And again, not to say this is not the case in other ecosystems, but I just feel just being here for 7 years, it has so much potential. And like David Rubenstein and the Carlyle Group, my goal is to build the best-in-class venture capital fund firm in the world, and doing that very strategically, thoughtfully, and let the companies we invest in be an indicator of our success, one of our successes.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And when you kind of mentioned the word firm again, and being one of the largest in the space and sticking to your mission, curious, what is your, it's still early innings and you've done a lot, what is version 2.0 and beyond, 5 years, 10 years, what is it that you are aspiring to build, more specifically, and how do you plan to get there?
Yeah. So talent is so important, and I think also, and I credit Jason Green from Emergence, our first investor, but more importantly, mentor. Emergence is by far one of the most storied SaaS VCs in the world. And one of the biggest pieces of advice he shared with me in terms of building the team is how they think about building the team internally. And so no matter if you're an analyst or you come in as a principal, there is a trajectory to become a partner, to become a general partner. And that's something that I always want to lean into the most is building a firm that gives everyone the opportunity to grow internally and become a partner. That's a huge milestone, and I think it's a great reputation and reflection on our firm. I think also about the strategy and how historically most venture capital firms are not as transparent in sharing their investment strategy. I think the ability to publicly share, beaten ahead, and share it often this inclusive investment strategy, again, a five-prong market back approach that to us allows us to widen our lens and best position our companies to outperform. And so one of my North Stars, Samir, is to whether you are a storied franchise in the Valley in New York or elsewhere, or you're an emerging manager, you can take this strategy and implement it in your firm. And in turn, your firm will see a more diverse pipeline of entrepreneurs and a more diversified portfolio. And in many, and we'll say that, Zeal pioneered this. Zeal pushed us to rethink, unbundle how we thought about our team, how we think about sourcing, how we think about geographic inclusivity, how we think about impact. And that to me would be, very much game changer. And, again, from a firm brand perspective, powerful. We think of inclusive investing, you should think of Zeal. I think the last thing I would say is how we think about future strategies. The ultimate goal, I think, that will remain consistent from fund one to fund two and beyond is investing in businesses and projects tech-enabled preferred that are turbocharging economic mobility, whether it be here in the US or global. Today, we're a US fund. The North Star obviously would be to have the flexibility to source, invest, and help scale global companies. But that will take a different type of infrastructure, a different type of leadership team, those who have relationships, much like how we thought about relationships here, source capabilities here in the US, taking that to the UK and Lagos and New Delhi and Latin America, where there's, and even China, where there's thriving entrepreneurial ecosystems. And then thinking about different categories that we believe are also pivotal to turbocharging economic mobility, like healthcare. Hint, hint, fund two, as we conclude our analysis, our market analysis, that will be a new vertical category that we're going to begin to underwrite, building on top of financial technology and future work. So the narrative will continue to be narrowing the wealth and skills gap. Is just that the more you think about it, you can't talk about financial inclusion and education and workforce readiness without talking about healthcare. And so again, having this capitalism and impact mindset are not mutually exclusive. I truly believe there is more than enough room, more than enough companies that are solving these painkiller problems. And at the same time, it's trial and error. You're flying this thing as you build it. But I think the most important thing any fund manager can do is just have a great support system, advisory board, personal, and as it relates to the fund, that allows you to think and make thoughtful decisions. Because that's essentially what our LPs are backing us and underwriting us for, is our investment acumen, our discipline, our pacing, our post-investment value creation, our communication, and that to me is so critical to the success of Zeal.
That's exciting, and something that we've never actually even talked about before. The idea of sharing your blueprint, after this fund and beyond, to others to emulate, and really not just for gain, but to broaden access to capital and help and open the market up is exciting. And the international piece, I'm looking forward to seeing from you. I think some of the issues that have unfortunately plagued this country are in many ways amplified in others. I've talked to international funds over the years who, in one way or another are trying to tackle the issue, but I don't think there's as much support behind them as they need. And again, the problems are very tough to tackle. One final thing I want to ask you, and I'm sure a lot of people are curious as well, is as a founder in maybe a non-core or target geography with a non-traditional background, it's a very diverse market out there. For those who might be saying, I'd have no idea how to build that advisory board that Nasir built, to get in touch with the investors that he maybe early on met at the coffee shop or through work. What is your advice to folks to just get started, right? How do you think the best way for them to meet investors and others, what is that in your mind?
That's a great question, and let me be clear, my answer to this is not the right answer. I think
there's no right answer.
I'm curious to learn from others, other peers' answers to this as well. But I'm a Kaufman Fellow, and shout out to Class 26. We talk a lot about our zone of genius, and really thinking thoughtfully about that one or a few things that differentiates us from everyone else. And to start a fund, I truly believe when they talk about track record, while important in terms of the deals that you've done in the past, your track record is your reputation as well. Mm-hmm. Track record is how people, particularly founders you've worked with, relationships you build, think of you. Would they even take your money, right? And so I'd encourage any aspiring fund manager to go back to his or her drawing board and really unpack what is your zone of genius, and share that with your mom, dad, grandmama, your partner, and allow them to really keep it real with you. And that may sound a little sappy, and it's one of the earliest things that I did, and even go as far as sharing your idea with someone that doesn't know you. I think sometimes people who know you, they're going to keep it. They don't want to. Someone who doesn't know you would probably keep it straight with you. They probably won't understand. You'll know whether or not they understand because they don't really know your background. But just recognize your zone of genius is one. Recognize your why. Really be able to get to the core of your why. And you only miss 100 shots you don't take. And I think one of the things for me was that recognize my risk appetite. If this thing doesn't raise, then what do I do? But I just had strong conviction in myself first. The first person has to believe is yourself. Mm-hmm. And then I did feel confident that those that said, yes, Nasir, go do it and believe in me, that gave me some encouragement as well.
Yeah, it's great advice, and some that I'll take myself after this podcast recording. But I appreciate you sharing this here. It's always a pleasure, as always, chatting with you. And I appreciate you coming on today and sharing your background and your views. And look forward to hearing more and learning more about what's to come from Zeal Fund 2 and beyond. But for now, I appreciate everybody joining us today on the Bear Ventures podcast. Please follow me, Samir Vig, on LinkedIn, and Bear VC, BARE Ventures on LinkedIn as well, to see new podcasts that come up. And until next time, take care all.